I'm pleased to welcome you to the Employee Motivation course. Today we'll answer the question, what is motivation? And it won't be just some superficial answer, but one based on research. In other words, it will be a comprehensive answer to the question, what is motivation? Why do we need to study the topic of motivation? Once you understand what it is, you'll learn how to motivate employees and improve their performance. And this skill of being able to motivate and improve efficiency is important for every manager and every employee. The course is designed in such a way that both human resources professionals and managers can take it. The topics will be clear and the tools applicable to both roles. This is the course website and here's the course syllabus. It consists of 6 sessions. It's based on the most up-to-date research on motivation. It includes the topic of Motivation 3.0, which is frequently discussed nowadays. We'll touch on the topic of corporate culture's impact. We'll talk about loyalty, engagement, and all these components of motivation. We'll study all its varieties in this course. So, in general, after completing this course, you'll know exactly what motivates people and what doesn't. Class agenda. Today we'll discuss human motivations, the reasons why people work at all, and what drives people at work in general. And how can we measure motivation? This is the most interesting part, because while many know how to measure loyalty, engagement, and satisfaction, not everyone knows how to study motivation. We'll tackle that today. I'll start with a brief introduction. I'll tell you about myself. I've worked in various companies as a human resources professional. These included Alpha Bank, STB TV channel, and Wargaming Company. If we're talking about motivation, I probably dealt with this question the most at STB TV channel because we needed to motivate a large number of people not just to work, but there were many creative employees there. We needed to motivate them to engage that creative component. And we achieved this largely thanks to corporate culture because we didn't have other tools, such as excellent management, since all the management was homegrown, not those who had gone through some extensive courses, development programs, and so on. And we didn't have budgets to do cool motivational things like they do in information technology companies. So I got a lot of practice in motivation there. And at Wargaming I also dealt with motivation, but from a different perspective, from the point of view of something closer to scientific research. What motivates people to come work for a company, stay with that company, that is, not quit and work well. I conducted an EVP audit and extensive research. At Prep IDO Company, motivation was like a department for a manager. It was one of the topics I dealt with. As an employee and as an expert, I can say that throughout my time working with us, I was also highly motivated, winning various nominations, participated in competitions, received diplomas, both as an employee and as an expert, spoke at conferences, and naturally continue to do so. I was recognized as a leader by various experts and ordinary people, obtained 3 international certifications so far, and continue to work on this. And the academy that provides training has also achieved a lot of success already. In my work, I rely on best practices. So this course, in which we will study motivation, is based on my personal experience and of course on research from various companies and different psychologists. So it is a combination. I would appreciate it if you could write about yourself and what you do for work. So, those participating in the Zoom conference can do this in the chat. Those watching on YouTube or who will watch the uploaded video on YouTube can do this in the comments. So, write in the comments what you do for work. Other people will be able to read this. And I will also be able to understand who you are. In this course, as in all our courses, we have homework assignments. Completing them will allow you to earn a diploma. You should do the homework as you progress through the course, not when your access is about to expire, rushing through everything with GPT chat. After all, these homework assignments are carefully planned, and it is expected that you complete them with equal care. So, the diploma we issue for completing the homework is provided on an online platform. It is really cool and will be stored there for a very long time. Alright, that was the introductory part. Now a small task. What do you think are the 3 words written here? If you can, write in the chat what these 3 words are. For many of us, it is now the end of the workday, the beginning of the week, and you have just had a weekend. I can assume that your motivation level is still high because you have had some rest. End of the workday. Maybe your motivation is lower than it was in the morning. As for those who will watch the video recording, I don't know when you'll be watching it or what your motivation level will be. But the success of this task will definitely depend on your motivation. Some people won't even be motivated to think about or write anything in those blanks, wondering why it's necessary. But Anna has written something. She's motivated. She says there's an effect of inspiration and knowledge here. Thank you, Anna. So far, you're the most motivated person in this class today. Let's check, yes, the effect of inspiration and knowledge. You wrote it absolutely correctly. Psychologists conduct a lot of research on human behavior, especially motivation. They're constantly trying to understand what motivates people, what influences them, and what doesn't. There are many experiments. First of all, this has been going on for a very long time. I think you've definitely heard of Mr. Maslow. Maybe you've even heard the name Hertzberg. Maybe you know Daniel Kahneman, Susan Fowler, Nir Eyal. These are probably the 5 most prominent names of people who have researched human motivation. And interestingly, each subsequent one builds on the work of the previous one and continues further. By the way, Pavlov, who studied dog behavior, also researched human behavior and found that people, when given some kind of stimulus, also changed their behavior, similar to how the dog reacted to the light. It's one of their many studies with many experiments and many stories surrounding it. But one of the studies concerns how people behave in the office, what motivates them, and one of the authors of such studies decided to see how people react depending on what they hear. Because when we work in an office, we hear many different things, especially if it's an open plan office. But it's probably a place like a co-working space. It seems different offices are different, and there, people often hear each other's conversations, some phone calls or Zoom meetings, some negotiations, and this affects them in some way. One of the psychologists decided to conduct an experiment. He gave a group of people a task to solve, and there were 2 groups. And for these groups of people, he played office noise. Well, you know, the kind of things people usually say in an office. For the second group, which was solving the task in this office noise, a short conversation was recorded of people who were also solving some task there and solved it successfully. And the second group, which heard about the successful problem solving in this noise, solved the task itself 13% faster and spent 14% more time trying to solve a more difficult task, which gave the author the idea that how we work is influenced by the environment we're in. Motivation depends on the company culture. For some companies, we'll be particularly discussing this topic of culture in subsequent sessions. Some companies have their entire culture geared towards making people work efficiently. There's even a term for it, high-performance culture. This high efficiency works in the background. It's like a background noise that influences people and makes them work better, more persistently, and faster. And imagine if you learned to create such a culture, this kind of background, and people in your company will work just 10% better, more persistently and faster, how much better the company's business results will be. Why did that psychologist's idea work with a certain conversation that influenced the behavior of the experiment participants in the background? Play is when we do something just for pleasure, the most powerful incentive for work. That dialogue, according to the psychologist, planted the idea of play or joy in people's minds. In other words, they heard that someone somewhere was somehow solving something and solving it successfully. And this was motivating too. Think about this. There's a company where you work or where you have worked. Yes, there's always a certain percentage of people who are students and have never worked anywhere. In that case, you can analyze how studies are organized. Because every study program, every educational institution is also like a company. I've changed many educational institutions myself. I studied in 3, let's say, 1 preschool, 3 schools, and 1 university. So I have the opportunity to observe how educational institutions work. Therefore, culture also has an influence there. Well, think about those companies. If you work or have worked there, what does your company do to incorporate the idea of play to keep people motivated? Because once again, play, when you do something just for pleasure, is the most powerful incentive for work. Here are a few examples of how you can do something. Some companies gamify processes. In fact, many processes can be gamified. And when I talk about gamification, I am not talking about, contests like at a wedding when the bride comes up with something. It can be just something simple and interesting like earning points when you go through the onboarding process. It can even be visualizing results on dashboards. This is also motivating. Today, for those who are following, Monobank launched a marketplace, the ability to buy various products in the banking app. There are a number of conveniences, but their CEO Oleg Gorokovsky, he posted a photo and commenting on the launch of the marketplace, says that the whole team is looking at the dashboard where user activity and purchases are displayed. And this is very inspiring, it is very motivating. They recall how the bank itself was launched. Yes, indeed, even a regular dashboard is motivating. When I worked at Preply, our CTO there made a very simple dashboard on a small basic computer that showed the number of students, number of lessons, and some other indicators, that is, some basic graphs of the company's vital signs. And this attracted attention and also motivated people. Simply when they saw that some numbers were growing. Competitions work great. When they organize competitions at work, it is often done in the sales department, although it works well in the retention department too. This also introduces some gamification, and it also adds motivation. This is also interesting. Talent assessment and providing work in the area of one's talents are also motivating. Every person, me, all of you have your own talents. But it is like something we are predisposed to. Something that comes easily to us. If we are given work in the area of our talents, it is like a game to us. It motivates us. It is just fun. It is interesting. Even though there is a lot of work that is not in our area of talent and it is not fun or interesting to us. I remember when I worked at Alpha Bank, the bank was going through a major crisis. It was a banking crisis, the biggest one. A lot of people were being laid off. I was working in headquarters, and I was told that our HR department needed help. They were issuing a bunch of orders there and needed to fill out employment record books. That is, they were laying off, I don't remember how many, several dozens of people a day. This was accompanied by a large number of entries, and I was asked to help in this delicate situation. All of you were asked. I remember, imagine I have about 20 years of work experience there. I remember that day. I remember where I'm sitting. I remember those employment record books, how I'm filling them out. It was the most unpleasant job of my life. I mean, I don't like these documents, production department personnel files, employment record books. For me, it was like hard labor. I don't know how I don't remember it anymore, but somehow I was trained, it passed me by, and I literally only filled them out for one day, and I never did it again, thank goodness, because it wasn't enjoyable at all. Let's move on. What motivates people? There are two types of motivation. We'll be discussing this in the course because, when people talk about motivation, they often imagine something, bright, rosy, fun, pleasant, delicious, interesting. But this doesn't always motivate people. Psychologists, again, will be relying on the work of a psychologist. They distinguish two types of motivation. The first type is when people see work as a game, when there's some goal they achieve through their work. When they realize their own potential, they increase their productivity. That's one type of motivation. And there's motivation caused by emotional stress, economic pressure, or inertia. This also makes people work, but if we're talking about this kind of positive motivation, it actually reduces motivation. You could say this is negative motivation. So it's still motivation, but it reduces the overall positive motivation. That is, people who work simply because they need to pay for a loan, or they need to pay rent, or some other expenses. This motivates them to work. It motivates them because they know it's necessary. Do they work with any positive feelings or enjoyment while doing so? No. So we need to know how motivational forces work, how they affect people, how to manage them, how to use them, how to make people work effectively. Because some companies use negative motivation. They tell the person work or we'll fine you. Fortunately, I encounter this less and less, but sometimes students from some manufacturing companies still mention it. The last examples I remember were some sewing workshops, and they force people to do things under the threat of fines. That is, if you don't complete something there, you get fined. It motivates, it does motivate. But at the same time, it's also demotivating. It compels, but it demotivates. And some people work simply because they're used to it. That's the worst. That is, they do something just because that's what they did yesterday, the day before that, and so on. How this is related to the culture of motivation. If the organizational culture maximizes the effects of the first three motives, which we will examine in detail, and tries to minimize the effect of the last three stimuli, as we call them, it ensures the achievement of the highest values in a phenomenon called absolute motivation. In this course, we'll be talking about a concept known as absolute motivation, or in English, total motivation. Our task is to study the tools that allow a company to achieve the maximum value of absolute motivation, total motivation. New business, new rules. Most companies work on tactical efficiency, that is, the ability to execute plans. However, another type called adaptive efficiency is also important, the ability to deviate from what was planned. This is what's changing now. Business is changing, especially with the advent of artificial intelligence GPT chat, and soon Elon Musk. If you saw his latest presentation, he promises that robots will be working. And he even quoted a price. Just think about it. The cost of a single robot produced by Tesla will be between $20,000 and $30,000. About the same as cars. What's $20,000, $30,000? The robot won't quit. It will work until it breaks down. We can judge by Tesla cars, they work very reliably. That is, for 10 years the car runs, the battery is fine, everything is fine. Let's imagine that the robot will work for 10 years. Let's take $30,000. That's $3,000 a year. That's less than $300 a month. Imagine how cheap the labor that robots will replace will be. People will be left with only this kind of non-standard, non-routine creative work, and in this work, a slightly different kind of efficiency and a different kind of motivation are important. Because when you simply need to fulfill a certain plan or standard for routine work, one set of motivational principles applies. But when you need to stimulate creativity, innovation, and do something non-standard, different principles come into play. That's why I said at the beginning of the class that at the TV channel where I worked, motivation was a particularly challenging task. Because on one hand, there were people doing routine work who could be motivated in one way. On the other hand, there were creative people who couldn't be intimidated by threats of fines or firing. And you can't just say, hey, make a great TV program and you'll get a bonus, because bonuses don't motivate them. Life is about something else entirely. It's about different factors. All right, we know this is an introductory session today. We're getting acquainted. You'll have a clear, complete understanding of what motivation is, how it works, and what you specifically need to do in a company by the end of this course, because the topic isn't actually that simple. The word is simple, motivation. But behind it, there's so much, so many studies, so many tools, companies, questionnaires, actions, and so on, that we'll have 6 intensive sessions dedicated to this term, including today's session. Okay, let's move on. So, the first part of efficiency is called tactical efficiency. It's how effectively you execute the plan. Common practice here includes possible dashboards, process maps, procedures, policies, quality control systems, performance management, and compensation. Do more, get more money. That's how companies manage this aspect. And there's a second part, adaptive efficiency. This can be assessed by how effectively you can deviate from plans. In other words, it's about creativity, problem solving, and proactivity. And this is what adaptation to what's happening is all about. It's a kind of adaptive performance. For example, if you need to fill some very simple vacancies, it's important to follow the outlined recruitment process and take many actions. But as soon as a non-standard atypical vacancy comes into recruitment, standard actions stop working. Often you need to look for innovative search methods, innovative ways of communicating with candidates, persuading candidates, and so on. And motivation stops working in the standard way. That is, if recruiters are motivated by closing more vacancies and getting more money, then when a recruiter receives a difficult vacancy, standard motivation will cause the recruiter to not deal with it at all. I have observed this. I have managed various recruitment departments. I have had up to 12 recruiters. We handled a maximum of about 2 vacancies simultaneously. When recruiters are motivated by the number of closed vacancies, and this is their bonus, they simply start to ignore any difficult, non-standard, atypical vacancies. They understand that it's a dead end. It will take a lot of time, energy, and so on. This will distract them from closing those vacancies that can be filled quickly, and as a result, they will earn less. Here you need to motivate differently. You cannot just say, look, you need to fill this difficult vacancy, but you will get a bonus for it. Well, that will not work. We need different approaches, different arguments, different tools. This course on motivation is for solving such problems. Because if I put it another way, look, if your business consists of routine processes, monotonous, repetitive, standard ones, and so on, you would better take a course on bonus systems. A good bonus system will make your employees efficient. You just need to choose the right metrics, select the right system, formalize it all, implement it, and so on. But if your business is about something non-standard, for example, you are in the IT business. Almost all of the IT business is non-standard. Software development or something else. Such things require creative solutions. If you are in a creative business, based on my personal experience and that of my students, you know how to motivate designers and the design department most quickly. Abolish the bonus system. Because a bonus system for designers simply demotivates them and kills creativity. This is both my experience and that of my students. Okay, long story short, I think you have understood the difference between such routine, templated tasks and creative tasks, and realized that the motivation system is different. It is hard to balance. Tactical and adaptive efficiency are polar opposites. They exist in a state of mutual tension, and very few leaders are able to balance them. Not many even realize that motivating cleaners, loaders, drivers, and designers, directors, script writers, or product managers are different things, completely opposite things. In most companies, the technique of production efficiency management, from demonstrating metrics to the system of evaluations and rewards, is aimed at improving tactical efficiency, that is, at enhancing exclusively routine work. A one-sided lean in this direction harms adaptive efficiency, and in the modern world, it generally comes at a high cost to companies. That is, many companies that work with such linear typical personnel do not know how to work with creative employees, do not know how to motivate them. Moreover, they effectively demotivate with their standard templated systems designed for regular employees. The factor of absolute motivation, which we will discuss in this course, is the ultimate tool in building an effective company culture. It is like a compass that will show whether your culture is developing in the right direction. Moreover, at the end of today's class, I will give you a test to assess specifically your personal motivation and that of any employees. That is, with simple questions, you will be able to measure the motivation of an employee, a department, or the entire company, regardless of the organization's size. You will get scientifically based advice in areas where you previously acted on intuition. For example, what leadership style should be used in the company, how to create promising jobs so that people want to work, how to build employees' careers, how to form the company's core values and make all employees believe in them, how to manage labor efficiency. What is a fair and effective system of compensation for work? How to manage an organization's culture. It's important for corporate culture. An organization's culture determines its effectiveness, said Tom Peters and Robert Waterman in the book In Search of Excellence. And there are many studies showing that companies with the right culture, which have been researched and described, are successful in the long term. That is, even books that were written 40 years ago about these companies are still super effective. That is, all sorts of psychologists have studied companies with successful corporate cultures. They were singled out. Tom Peters started doing this. Jim Collins continued this work in his book, and it continues to be done by various authors. Now George Bursey is also studying corporate culture and has identified factors. The work is constantly being done, but the essence remains the same. Companies with the right culture and the right motivation are more effective and more successful than all others. It's important. The productivity of even the most talented employees is reduced to half of their potential if they find themselves in organizations with a mediocre culture. That's the point. Let's move on. Simple copying doesn't work. Copying companies with successful cultures such as Apple, Southwest Airlines, Zappos, Ritz-Carlton is pointless. Replicated cultures don't provide proper incentives and therefore don't take root. They lack absolute motivation. For example, Whole Foods is one of the leaders in cultivating a culture that motivates people. It embodies the principle of absolute motivation. It creates a strong sense of play, purpose, and self-realization for employees, while striving to minimize emotional stress for people, minimal economic pressure and apathy compared to other companies. Whole Foods' absolute motivation factor is 3 times higher than that of its 3 closest competitors. They have concepts like self-managed teams and even stability in pay. Remember this company, Whole Foods. What else is interesting? Psychological studies show that companies with high employee motivation also have high levels of customer satisfaction. In other words, there is a direct correlation between customer satisfaction and the absolute motivation index of employees. Since many companies lack a spirit of partnership or cultural and historical values, all that is left for these companies is to motivate people with money. But this is a weak binding agent. If you think we will create a bonus system for everyone and everyone will work great, you are mistaken. 6 reasons why we work. Look, there are many interesting examples of people trying to motivate with things that do not work. For instance, at one point in the United Arab Emirates, they tried to combat obesity in the population. The government offered a Your Weight in Gold program. They said that anyone who loses 1 kilogram of weight within a certain period would receive 1 gram of gold. There were many participants, but only a quarter actually managed to lose weight and receive their money. And within 4 months after the program, they gained back the weight and a little more. In other words, they wanted to motivate people with money to do something, but money only worked as a very short-term effect. Here are all 6 motivation factors and how they work. So these factors are grouped into spheres: the work itself, self-understanding, and external forces. The strongest and most direct motivation is play, when a person does something simply because they get a kick out of it. I am sure you have seen people in your current company or others who are just thrilled by their work. They do not need anything else. They are just enjoying themselves. And the main thing is that no one poaches them or seriously offends them. There are people who are motivated by setting goals for themselves and achieving them. They might not enjoy the work itself as much as achieving goals through the work and realizing potential. There are things that make people work, but they decrease absolute motivation. These are emotional tension, economic pressure, and inertia. Emotional tension is when someone makes you work, like a boss, or a wife or husband. Economic pressure is when you need money to live, and inertia is because people work because they're used to it. So, the direct motives in descending order of motivational strength are play, purpose, and realizing one's own potential. They increase motivation, while indirect motives, they decrease motivation. Again, these are psychological or emotional tension, economic factors, and inertia. Now let's look in more detail at all 6 factors of motivating people at work. The feeling of play arises when you do your work simply because you enjoy it. For you, the work itself becomes the reward. It's like esports players who play computer games and win competitions. For them, computer games are a thrill, For them, work is esports. It's enjoyable because they like playing on the computer. Scientists describe this kind of motivation as intrinsic. At the core of play is just curiosity and a tendency to experiment. Purpose is the next motivational factor. The purpose motive manifests when you assign primary value to the outcome of the activity rather than to the activity itself. The work may be enjoyable or not, but you value its effect. You know how many people don't like cleaning, but they enjoy having a clean apartment, and that motivates them. They clean because they like a clean apartment, even though they don't enjoy the cleaning process itself. This is when the result motivates, rather than the process itself, and realizing one's own potential. It occurs when a person is concerned with a secondary outcome. In other words, what's important for a person is not what they do or the direct result of their work, but the outcome they get for doing the work. For example, when a person is given a bonus for successful work, and they need that money for something specific. That's the secondary outcome right there. And it doesn't have to be just money, it could be career advancement or the promise of something else. So it's not directly related. The reward isn't related to the work itself, but the reward is valuable to the person. They might offer them an overseas business trip, they might offer extended time off for completing a task. So, promising something valuable that's not directly related to what I was doing, but it's something that I value. For example, I don't really want to or like doing reports. They told me, Mike, please do an Excel report. It is really needed, very urgent, and we will give you, I don't know, a new iPhone. And I want a new iPhone. I am motivated to do the report because I really want it. The iPhone is not directly related to the report. There is no connection. But I want it. This is called realizing one's own potential. Because it is something tangible, something intangible. This one is weaker. In other words, the motive of realizing potential is weaker than the motives of play and purpose, as it relates to a secondary work outcome that is 2 or more steps removed from the actual reality. In conclusion, a corporate culture that encourages people to work based on motives of play, purpose, and self-realization ensures the highest long-term efficiency of an organization's activities. Here, Netflix is one of the leaders. It is no wonder there are several books already written about them, including The Strongest and others, as Netflix successfully implements these principles. Now let us talk about the negative aspects, psychological or emotional tension. A person is driven to action by emotional tension, for example, from disappointment, guilt, or shame in front of others. For example, a child practices the piano solely to avoid disappointing their parents. You do not change jobs because its prestige boosts your self-esteem. A person on a diet cares about healthy eating because they do not like how they look, or because they feel guilty when a colleague notices their hand in the cookie box. So it kind of stimulates, but through emotional tension. Why is this bad? Because it creates the wrong atmosphere. For example, Google conducted a study and identified 5 factors of an effective team. One of the primary factors is psychological safety. When people feel protected, knowing they will not be fired for experimenting with something. Then dependability, structure, and clarity, meaning of work and impact of work. Similarly, another study by Google on leadership effectiveness also highlights one of the important aspects of a leader's work, which is described as follows. An effective leader, according to Google, creates an atmosphere of team cohesion by caring about people's success and well-being. Economic factors of motivation are those that reduce absolute motivation but still make people work. When you do something solely for a reward or to avoid punishment. For example, this can manifest in the desire to get a bonus or promotion, avoid being fired, or escape a harsh reprimand from an angry boss. The main mistake in understanding economic motives is reducing them solely to monetary issues. A person's income and the economic motives for their behavior are not directly correlated. That is, people might not need the money as much as they fear being scolded, that if they don't get some bonus, they'll judge themselves for not receiving it. If money is the only incentive for an activity, its efficiency, that is, work performance, usually decreases. Inertia is also a poor incentive. Motivation can be so far removed from work that it's hard to tell what fuels it. You do your job simply because you did it yesterday. And if employees just don't leave the company, that's not enough. It's preferable for them to stay guided by some positive motives. For example, Zappos found a clever solution for such situations. Newly hired employees go through a 4-week training program, after which the company offers anyone who decides to leave a bonus of 1 month's salary, so that people who ended up in the company by chance would be better off leaving. We did something similar at Ideal. We thought long and hard about how to organize employee dismissals, how to make them as painless as possible. We eliminated the vacation system where people have a certain amount of vacation days saved up. We implemented unlimited vacation time. As a result, the concept of compensation for unused vacation disappeared. And we thought we needed to compensate for this somehow. In short, we concluded that we wanted to pay severance. And we started thinking about when a person quits or when we lay them off, in which case the severance should be higher. At first, we thought it should be higher when a person quits on their own than when we fire them, because when we fire them, it seems they don't deserve it. Then we thought about it and decided that no, it should be the other way around. Just a second. Oh no, that's not right. Initially, we thought that when we lay someone off, it should be higher because the person has fewer choices in that case, less opportunity to prepare and so on. Then, on the contrary, we said no, we'll pay more when a person quits on their own and less when we fire them, so that a person, if they don't value the job and if they see that they're not coping, would have the desire to leave quickly on their own rather than wait to be fired. We did something similar to what's being suggested here. Why do we work? These are the three direct motives. As a rule, they increase work efficiency, while indirect motives decrease it. The more directly a motive is related to a specific activity, the higher its efficiency. Play is the motive closest to work, so it has the strongest influence on it. The goal motive is one step behind, second in degree, and the desire for self-realization is 2 steps away from the first motive, and third in effectiveness. How should it be? A high degree of absolute motivation occurs when direct motives prevail over indirect ones in a person's activity. Absolute motivation is the foundation of any corporate culture aimed at high efficiency and productivity of employees. I think by now you've realized that motivating with money, bonuses, and rewards is far from the most effective strategy because it's quite far removed from the actual work. Let's move on. An experiment with a call center. So, here's another study from a different company. They decided to eliminate bonuses in the call center and increase salaries. They also eliminated performance evaluations for call center employees to reduce stress and gave them the freedom to express themselves, meaning not to work solely from a script, to reduce this inertia of doing things just because I'm used to doing them on autopilot. They introduced a game element, removing work by manuals, and instead created live discussions with the client. They set a goal of 200 clients per employee and focused on helping customers. They started sharing new skills with their colleagues, and the result in this sales-focused call center was that targets were exceeded by 2 times. Because instead of external system factors of this boring, monotonous work, they added more play, liveliness, and interest, and the operators began to work better. There are studies from various companies that have tried different approaches, and here's a demonstration of how a company's revenue, generated by employees per hour in United States dollars, depends on which motivational factors are involved. In other words, the higher the absolute motivation involved, the higher the company's revenue per employee for 1 hour of their work. So ask yourself, why do your employees come to work every day? Think about it now. You have 6 options. The first option, your employees come to work every day because it's fun there. That is, it's fun and interesting there, the work itself. When I worked at Play, it was a startup back then, I observed this. The salaries were not the highest in the industry. They were low, but not the lowest. So, in fact, probably any Play employee could go work for another company and earn a little bit more. The office was simple. We worked in a co-working space, the hub, not the coolest office either. It's not bad by standards, but not the coolest. The benefits package, well, it wasn't the most luxurious either. There were good things, but you could get more at other companies. But people went there with pleasure. They were really excited about working in a startup. They liked the startup atmosphere. They wanted to be involved. They wanted to create their own startup later. So I saw this, people came to work because it was fun. Second, why your people might come to work is that they like the result of their work. That is, they do something, and they like what comes out as a result. They look at the outcome. By the way, many people worked like this in television. Many people liked it. The process itself was sometimes complicated, and there were unpleasant moments. But when the program goes on air, when it's all put together, it evokes some emotion. Viewers watch it, and you see this result, and it's motivating. Many people worked like that. You might have something of your own. Third, this is how many people work in fast-moving consumer goods. In fast-moving consumer goods, by the way, there's a pretty good motivation system. People work there because they get some kind of self-realization from their work. Some people come to FMCG for career growth. Some come to a beautiful office. Some come to earn money, to earn more money, to buy themselves an apartment. This is what FMCG provides. Now let's move on to negative motivation factors. Some people work for you because there's emotional tension. These are often such negative corporate cultures. People are intimidated, told that they are nobody, worth nothing, and they won't be hired anywhere else. They're indebted for life, so they're obligated to work. So they come to you with a sense of guilt that they are nobody, nothing. I need to work somewhere. I have to come to work on time because the boss will yell at me and make me apologize. Some people work just because they need money. That is, people come to work for you because they need to pay for rent or some loans they have, or just for food, and they have no other option. And the worst thing is if people come to work for you just because they're used to it. These are people who work in some state-owned enterprises, with meager salaries and poor conditions. They're just too lazy to even think about where else they could work. They're just used to going to the same place year after year doing the same job. This is called inertia, the factor of absolute motivation. The absolute motivation index combines 6 motives. Yes, these 6 motives don't necessarily work by excluding each other. They can have the same influence. We'll get to the questionnaire now, and you'll understand. To get the value, we add up the level of each participant's perception of direct motives acting on them, and then subtract the sum of indirect motive indicators from the resulting value. People with a high absolute motivation index usually show greater efficiency, coefficients. All motives affect a person differently in terms of their effectiveness. The play motive, if present, is about twice as strong as the goal motive. The goal motive is about 3 times more powerful than the self-realization motive, inertia. Has 2 times the negative impact of economic pressure, while economic pressure has 3 times the negative effect of psychological stress. And the absolute motivation index was designed so that its value could range from -100 to 100. If a person's absolute motivation is -100, they are working but are minimally effective. Here is the survey. It contains 6 questions that cover all 6 factors, which can be answered on a scale from 1 to 7 based on the level of agreement. Let us read these questions. Then I will show you the formula and give you a table where you can complete this. I will drop it right here in the chat for you, and you can find out about yourself. Let us do it this way so you can do it in parallel now. I have sent you the link. Look, there is a link in the chat. You click on that link, and you will be taken to a Google Sheets page. It prompts you to create a copy. You agree? And then you can select from 1 to 7 in each cell. In other words, you need to choose from 1 to 7 for each question based on your level of agreement. Well, let us go through the statements. They are the same ones. I will stop here and read them. For example, the first statement, how much do you agree? I continue to work at my current job because without this job, I would worry that I could not achieve my financial goals. Think about it, evaluate objectively. From 1 to 7, your degree of agreement. 1 means you completely disagree, 7 means you completely agree. Second statement, there are no compelling reasons why I continue to work at my current job. Third statement, I continue to work at my current job because if I did not, I would disappoint myself or people close to me. Husband, wife, dad, mom, kids, maybe the boss. Next statement. I continue to work at my current job because I believe this job has an important purpose. Next statement. And I continue to work at my current job because the work itself is fun. And the last statement, I continue to work at my current job because this type of work will help me achieve my personal goals. There's a formula here. All these coefficients are already entered. If you want to copy the formula or make your own table, you can take it from here, or just use this file. If anyone who's watching online now and has access to the chat has filled out the questionnaire, please write what score you got. You can have between -100 and 100 points, so share if you're interested. Look, let's do this. Oh, Irina wrote that there's an error. Let's do it this way. So, for example, you're watching this on YouTube. To find this questionnaire, you'll need to find the Mike Pritula Academy chat on Telegram, and the presentation will be posted there. In the files section, look, there will be a presentation and a link. I'm sending this presentation there now so those who will watch the recordings can take it. Examples of scores at the company level, because at the individual level it can be a high score, but at the company level it's more difficult. The highest score was Southwest Airlines with 41 points. Meanwhile, the airline with the lowest score among those studied had 22 points. And here's a comparison of Southwest Airlines and 3 competitors. That is, the competitors did have a play motive, but it was stronger for Southwest Airlines. However, the psychological stress was higher for the competitors. And again, passenger satisfaction and its connection to the motivation index also shows a direct correlation. Just as with Whole Foods, where customer satisfaction was higher for companies with higher absolute motivation, the same is true for the airline industry. And here are a few more examples. Starbucks has an absolute motivation index of 18 points, while competitors in retail face more challenging conditions. Apple Store has 26 points, while competitors have 12. And here are a few more companies, showing how their absolute motivation index differs from their competitors. Books you can read about motivation. Daniel Pink, then Neil Doshi. Here's what I like about the book Primed to Perform. Neil Doshi and Lindsay McGregor. They took all the research on motivation, including Daniel Pink's work, and turned it into a consulting tool for businesses. So while Daniel Pink isn't primarily focused on business and simply researched human motivation, Doshi's work is specifically in the context of business. Tony Hsieh's Delivering Happiness is more about culture, specifically about corporate culture and motivation, where people are content and happy. Tom Peters' book was mentioned today, Lessons from Successful American Companies and the Importance of Culture in a Company's Success. Netflix was also mentioned today, a company that managed to create a culture engaging the top 3 motivation factors. The book is powerful. Homework assignment. Conduct a survey to determine the level of motivation in your department. Send out the file and ask for the completed file to be returned to you. And write specific actions the company could take to improve employee motivation, according to the total motivation model. This concludes our first introductory session on motivation theory. Next, we'll discuss the connection between motivation and performance, then the importance of corporate culture, followed by loyalty, engagement, and finally, motivation. That's all for now. Thank you for being with me. For those of you taking the course, we'll meet again soon. For those who aren't participating in this course yet, come join us, get trained, and learn about how we can truly motivate people in the era of artificial intelligence and robots, which will soon be helping us with our work and taking over all routine tasks. That's all for now. See you soon. Bye-bye.